appreciative of, sorry, there we go. We are definitely appreciative of all the support of all of our sponsors. And you guys have been a regular longtime sponsor and we appreciate it. So thank you. And so with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand it over to Braydon. I don't know if you have a presentation you want to share, Braydon, or if you're just going to chat a little bit. But I won't even bother introducing you. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Nothing too formal. Just pretty simple to start with. Hi, everybody. My name is Braydon Nichols. I'm the Washington regional rep here. I joined not too long ago, just a couple months ago. But yeah, I'm an ER nurse. I live up here in Tacoma, Washington. I was pretty unfamiliar with goats up until this past year, or I guess past 2 years now. And once I kind of found out about them, because I moved up here from Oklahoma, it was an instant love for them. So we went out hiking a couple times and had some really cool encounters. I was like, man, I need to figure out more about these things. So started looking into it. I've been hearing talks of, if any of you guys are familiar with a lot of the projects going out on the Olympic Peninsula, which is actually where I had my first goat encounter. So it's a little weird. If you're not familiar, we moved a lot of the populations from the Olympic side over to the Cascade Range. They're actually an introduced species to that area. But it's weird that my first interaction with one over there is one that I can't repeat now because they've been moved. So I was like, you know, with as much publicity as they've been getting, this is something I'd like to learn more about. Sorry, just one moment. Okay. So with that, I started looking them up more. I wanted to read about them and find out more about the species that I'd never seen coming from Oklahoma. So with that, started reading Beast the Color of Winter, if any of you guys are familiar with that book. Started trying to find ways to spend more time in the field with them, whether that was going out with the camera to try to get pictures. I'm not quite to Darren's level yet, if anyone has taken a look at his Instagram, but you know, good inspiration. So after spending more and more time, you know, getting to learn more about them, learn about RMGA, I was like, I need to get involved with this awesome species here. So with the past year, I actually got involved with a couple of the population counts, which were an absolute blast. I'd never done anything like it conservation-wise for a volunteer opportunity. I've been involved with, here in Washington, we have the Columbia pygmy rabbit, which is an endangered species up here. I get involved a little bit with like some data collection with them, you know, investigating specimens, so like they'd catch them and just to kind of get health points on, but never anything as involved and as adventurous as some of these goat counts are. So I knew instantly that I had to go be a part of it. We started off with the Southwest, I think it's the Henry Mountain Range, this past summer for the first count, and it was a little more than I was bargaining for at first. You know, you think just get up there with your glass and count them and then you go home, but it was a fun whole backpacking trip. Made some good friends, got to see numbers of goats I had never seen before. I think we ended up counting 63 in our little area, just over a span of 2 days. So like I said, coming from a guy that runs into one on a trail and is amazed to now we're seeing 63 on a ridge, was a bit of a change in a perspective for him, but it was a lot of fun. With that, I had so much fun and met so many great people with that count that I had to go on to do the next one. That was, I think, just a couple of weeks later, honestly. So we went over to Glacier National Park, which was an awesome experience. I've not ever tried to get a backpacking permit in the park, but this opportunity provided one. And I've heard that that is not a thing that everybody gets to do. So we got to spend 3 days up there in Glacier, staying at these real remote backcountry sites, actually where I met Darren and Carla there, and just had an amazing time. It's cool to spend time with these awesome animals, getting to observe them with their behaviors and spend time in the awesome places that they do as well. And so after that, and talking with RMGA about the opportunity for being the regional rep up here, I knew I had to stay involved and get to do more stuff. with that, we've got some exciting things on the horizon. Hoping to get some population counts going here in Washington, so maybe I don't have to drive to Montana every single time. So if anybody's near this area or also feels like driving maybe from Montana back, keep an ear out for some cool stuff we may have coming up this summer. I had so much fun with all of that, getting to spend time with the goats, doing the population counts and all. I actually went as far as going on a hunt for my first this past October. It was a blast. We went up to Southeast Alaska, one of the few places you can actually do it over the counter. A little different going with a guide compared to some of the Canadian residents I know here who can just get their tag and go, but was still a great time. I ended up getting a 48-inch Billy I think we'd climbed 3,500 feet and 1.25 miles to get up to where he was, goat habitat, like everyone's familiar with. And I mean, truly like one of like the best experiences of my life, provided, by the goats. So happy to give back and do what we can. One thing kind of leading into what Laura's got going today was actually in all of these experiences that I'd had during the counts, during the hunt, the few interactions I'd had out on the Olympic Peninsula, one thing I noticed is how influenced they had been by human interactions, whether that is them being accustomed to humans being near, like just being familiar with them walking on the trails, knowing where to find salt from urine samples that we've left out there, or to being skittish of us in particular spots. And then one I noticed in particular on my hunt was how bothered they are by planes and helicopters that were near us just on that ridge, because those ones are a little more wild in that spot. Not tons of people going up there hiking where we were at Southeast Alaska, but it was interesting to see like real-time reactions to planes that were doing surveys in the areas or helicopters that were taking people to maybe go skiing. So you could tell how much stress it was applying on their populations in that area. So it was really neat to see Laura's presentation she has coming up for us tonight, and actually get to know more about it than just anecdotal, firsthand accounts. Anybody have any questions for me or anything from any of that, or? No?
Right.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Braydon. We are so happy to have you on our team, and I'm really excited. And although my camera's not on, my fingers are crossed that we can get some counts arranged in Washington. So
yeah, absolutely. Everybody keep an ear out. If you feel like joining us, feel free once we get the message out there.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Braydon.
Yeah, thank you.
And with that, I think we'll jump straight into Laura if you're ready to go. Laura, this is about the time we probably will have a technical difficulty.
I did practice before, so let's see.
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen, and much like I did to Braydon, I think I'm just going to let you dive on in and you can introduce yourself, and away we go.
Okay.
So we have to start by saying, nice shirt, Laura.
Thank you.
It was
given to Darren. Gave this to me a few days ago at the sheep show in Kamloops. So thank you, Darren.
You've excellent taste.
Yes. It's been really exciting getting back into mountain ungulates in the past couple weeks. I finished my thesis back in June 2022, and then I kind of went right into doing some contract work with chronic wasting disease in deer. So when I was asked to do this, I got really excited because I kind of want to present this research for the first time since graduating, with just like a little bit more fun with it. So I kind of made it a little bit more informal, not so technical, but I'm happy to discuss the technical things if anyone has any questions about methods and stuff. So with that, are we good to go? Start presentationing?
Yep, I can see your screen and away we go.
Sounds good. So I concluded this research in June of 2022. And since I have started to slowly format this thesis into a manuscript for publication in a journal, so keep your eye out for that in the next 2 years. And I kind of plan on talking about my research for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then I do also want to discuss the ways that the Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance Science and Conservation Funding helped out this project. And then I do want to open the floor to discussion and questions if anyone has them. I think with a group like this, it's nice to keep it more like of a discussion and a question period than me just telling you all the sciencey facts and things that I found out. So we titled this research, Human Conflict and Coexistence with Mountain Goats in a Protected Alpine Landscape. And I always enjoyed that this research was part of a protected area because it's what I was connected to. I'm not a hunter currently. And so I enjoyed the outdoors in ways like hiking and camping. And for a long time, I didn't understand the impact that I had doing these activities on the landscape and to wildlife. And so this kind of boils down to the dual mandate of protected areas, and that protected areas are created to create recreational opportunities for people. And they're also created to protect areas for biodiversity. And while these two things are great on their own, the consequential human-wildlife interactions that can occur with humans and wildlife using the same areas requires a little bit more understanding. And so one thing that I'm really interested in still, and was really interested in this research, is understanding how to achieve human-wildlife coexistence in protected areas, and building an understanding of how human activities influence the biological interactions between wildlife and their habitats. And so the area that I studied was Cathedral Provincial Park, which is about 2.5 hours southwest of Kelowna, British Columbia, and is right on the British Columbia-Washington border. So this is a little map that I made. You can kind of see the campground areas, the general border of the park, and then the mountain goat locations. So this is just all mountain goat locations I had available, not broken up into any individuals or seasons. So you can kind of just see what areas of the park they use the most, and that they do move down into Washington, this herd. And Cathedral Provincial Park, which I might also abbreviate into CPP because it is a mouthful otherwise, is absolutely beautiful. The first time I ever went up there, I was like starstruck. It was the first time in an alpine like this for me, and I have loved every trip I've gone back. There's so many people up there who just love enjoying the views and the hiking opportunities, and people who go up there also really love getting up close and personal with some mountain goats. So the goat herding CPP was estimated at approximately 70 individuals in the 1980s, but the herd is now down to approximately 30 individuals, indicating some sort of decline in the past 40 years. And this herd is also very unique due to their southern location in the province, their transboundary movements, and their small herd size. However, these aspects of their ecology are also make them extremely sensitive to human disturbance. So the Okanagan makes up the smallest percentage of mountain goats in the province. There's about less than 1% of mountain goats in the region, and the cathedral herd is included in that. And so because of their location in a protected area and their small herd size, they have developed a number of management issues in the park. And these two issues primarily arise from two things, being recreation from people and helicopter flight training. So although these two types of disturbances may seem very different, they can both change the ways that animals interact with their environment. So recreation is concerned because it can affect the spatial and temporal habitat use in animals and cause behavioral shifts such as habituation or increased vigilance. And helicopters, which are perhaps a more obvious concern due to how loud and intrusive they can alter wildlife behaviors in the same ways and can alter habitat movement patterns and also cause animals to displace from preferred habitat. So Cathedral Park offers this really unique opportunity to study how these two very different sources of disturbance are affecting the mountain goats. The first issue with recreation. Oh, pardon? Oh, okay. So the first issue with recreation is that goats in the park have become habituated to humans. Looking at the photo here, you can see that goats just come right up through the campground area. They truly have really no issues with coming really close to people and walking through the campground. And these close encounters have concerned park rangers and park staff in previous years, because of goats can get very aggressive with people, as we have seen in other parks where this is occurring. And the reason that these goats are so attracted to human use areas, we think, is because of the urine in the campground. So I was lucky enough to pick a camp spot the last time I was up there that someone must have, gone out of their tent and peed right beside there in the middle of the night. And this goat had no problem coming very close to my tent and having me, shine a bright light at it as it kind of licked up some urine. And so normally these goats will supplement salt using natural mineral sites. However, if these sites are lacking in Cathedral, using the salt deposits in the campground may be a good incentive to overcome their natural caution of people and just come right on in. And so mountain goat habituation and this intraspecific aggression for salt is leading to conflict, which isn't good for humans or mountain goats. So in Cathedral, we're trying to be proactive with management and avoid getting to a point in time when goats start becoming aggressive with people over salt. And in addition to recreation, one helicopter company has a permit to operate flight training in the park in the fall, winter, and spring. And these helicopters may negatively disturb mountain goats during critical times in the year when their body condition is low, mobility is difficult due to the snowpack, and there's generally little forage available. So we want to find out how to minimize these effects. In British Columbia, there are provincial best management practices set for helicopter use in mountain goat habitat. And in general, helicopters are to maintain a 2,000 meter horizontal and 500 meter vertical distance setback from mountain goat habitat. So we kind of use these distance thresholds as a baseline for our analyses that we performed. So together, these two issues, being recreation and helicopter use, point toward a need to better understand the spatial ecology of goats in Cathedral and the human mountain goat interactions within the park. So to look at how recreation was a source of disturbance, I defined mountain goat habitat selection and home range, which allowed me to determine areas where recreation and mountain goats overlap the most. I also looked at the effect of helicopter activity as a source of disturbance. And to do that, I quantified the influence helicopters have on mountain goat movement and habitat selection. And this allowed me to determine if and when helicopters have the biggest effect on mountain goats. So to fulfill these objectives, you need to use some data. So I primarily use GPS location data, which I collected from 11 mountain goats in Cathedral Park from June 2019 until March 2021. At the time when this study was conducted, there were 2 mortalities, both found to be of natural causes, and one of those collars was redeployed and included in the study. And the collars were also programmed to obtain locations every 6.25 hours. And we also were able to perform a remote increase to one location every 2.25 hours to capture a more fine scale movement when helicopters were flying. So we suspected that goats would exhibit different movements when helicopters were flying. So that was the increase in fix rate was to sort of capture that. We also used helicopter GPS location data collected from the helicopter training company on the flights that flew in and around Cathedral. So we used helicopter data from October 2019 until March 2021. And helicopters are scheduled to fly 3 to 5 days a month from October until June. And in my study, this included 32 flight dates total and a total of 87 hours and 20 minutes of flight time. In addition, it's important to note that on any flight date, it was possible for 1 to 4 helicopters to be flying in one time, and flights varied in length and time of day. So the helicopter data was very sporadic and variable in its length and time. And also the fix rate for helicopters was really fine scale, and they had a location every 5 seconds that they were flying for. So to start, I'm going to break up my methods and results and discussion into the two sort of sections of disturbance I'm talking about. So I'm going to start with recreation, and then I will discuss helicopter use. So to figure out how recreation was influencing goats in Cathedral, I asked the question, what habitat features do mountain goats in Cathedral select for seasonally? And do they select for human use features during the summer specifically? And to answer this question, I used the course scale 6¼ hour mountain goat data. I used autocorrelated home range density estimation to estimate home ranges. And in addition, I formulated seasonal resource selection functions for 4 seasons: fall, winter, spring, and summer. And those included resource variables, human use variables, and disturbance variables. And this allowed me to figure out what habitat features mountain goats select for most or least during the different seasons. Okay, so moving on to some results. I'm going to go over the home range results first. And it's kind of nice. These are pretty nice to look at. So this is a GID 06. She was a female, and this was her summer home range for 2019 and 2020. So I found that all goats remained in the Cathedral in the summertime. All goats that did remain in the Cathedral in the summertime, all their home ranges overlapped with human use areas. And also all individuals returned to the same home range they had occupied the previous year. So this shows that goats are exhibiting range fidelity, meaning they use the same areas year after year in the same seasons. As well, I found that the average female home range was larger than the average male home range quite significantly. Yeah, it's just an interesting thing. Moving on to the winter time. Winter goats showed no home range fidelity between years, and all individuals occupied different home ranges between years. As well, goats shifted away from human use areas. As you can see here, the Little Cathedral Lakes Lodge pin, which was where her summer home range was last year, her winter home range in 2019. You can see it's quite small, and they all did kind of migrate south down to the south-facing slope right along the BC-Washington border. As well, both male and female home ranges decreased substantially, and males actually exhibited larger home ranges in the first year. In the second year, overall home range size increased for both sexes. As you can see, for GID home 6, her home range increased substantially, and this indicates to me a shift in resource availability in the wintertime. As well, for both males and females, this year their home range size did increase. So moving on to the results of the resource selection function, I'm going to project, right here on the screen is a projection of the summer resource selection function results, where the 2 blue dots represent the campgrounds and the darker areas indicate high selection. So the formula that we use basically takes all the points from the goats, compares them to random points, and then the function is able to detect which habitat variables based on the geospatial data I used, the goats select for mostly in each season. So the darker purple areas represent more used areas. You can kind of see that they are all using the high area peaks. There's quite a bit of selection right in the campground area where the 2 blue dots are and the trails kind of intersect. And this was mirrored in the results of the variables from the selection function, that goats selected for areas primarily close to human features and also close to escape terrain, so areas where they're very cliffy, very rugged, steep areas. Now compare this to the projection of the winter home range selection, where you can see that goat selection was very concentrated on the southern slopes down by the BC-Washington border. And I found that more resource variables, so elevation, vegetation, distance to escape terrain, and solar radiation were the strongest predictors of mountain goat selection in the fall, winter, and spring. So this indicates that these seasons are more so resource-based than they are based on selecting for human use areas. So what does all this mean? So in the summertime, as I just said, all home ranges overlap with human use areas, and goats exhibited high range fidelity. And as well, goats showed high selection for areas associated with humans and close to escape terrain, indicating that goats will tolerate being close to humans if there's also security features nearby. And so together, these observations point towards the fact that goats might be attracted to human use areas in the summertime. But why is that? Well, in the summertime, goats seek out salt to supplement their diet a lot, especially females, because they're feeding kids, and especially because alpine forage lacks a lot of sodium. So it is possible that the herd knows that there's a reliable source of anthropogenic salt in the campground, and they make the trek back there every summer, and they're teaching their babies how to do this. So it's probably just a generational thing where they know that the salt is in the campground is reliable, it's there, and they go down there, and they've started to have this habit of seeking out anthropogenic urine rather than the natural mineral-like sites that could be in Cathedral. Compared to the fall, winter, and spring, where no home ranges overlap with human use areas, and goats change their home ranges between years. So this, along with the results of the resource selection function, indicate that the seasons are largely resource driven, and goats will shift home range and habitat based on shifts in resource availability and not so much on the presence of humans. So now I'm going to discuss the helicopter side of things. So the primary question I asked was, do helicopters change the ways goats move? And do they displace goats from home range or preferred habitat? And so the data on the helicopter side of things was a lot more hard to estimate and hard to experiment with, because the helicopters were so sporadic in nature and they aren't able to stick to an experimental schedule because of weather and all the other variables that go into flying a helicopter. We kind of had to get creative with how we were going to decide what was a date that potentially could change goat behavior. So we knew that we wanted to compare before helicopter behavior to after helicopter behavior to capture goat response. And so at the bottom of your screen is a hypothetical date, couple weeks in November, where the blue dates are dates helicopters would have flown on, and the orange dates are dates that helicopters wouldn't have flown on. So we created 3 temporal scales, immediate, meso, and course, to capture change in movement. And what the immediate scale included was 6 hours before and after the helicopter event. The meso was 24 hours before and after the helicopter event, and course was 3 days before and after the helicopter event. So we assumed that goat behavior and movement would gradually change within these temporal scales, and therefore we could see that change in a model. And then so we categorize these temporal scales into before and after. And then there's just what another date would look like. If the dates were closer together, we wouldn't allow the different temporal scales to overlap. So that's kind of what that is showing. So to answer the question, I used the 2¼ hour location data from mountain goats, as well as the location data from the helicopter flights. In addition, to compare goat response before and after helicopter activity, I used the temporal scales I just explained in the previous slide. And in this section, I also used the home range estimates and resource selection function results from the previous section, and quantified goat movement by calculating 3 movement metrics, which are attributed to disturbance. So total distance, mean squared displacement, and straightness. And these are all kind of measures of distance that an animal has traveled, or how tortuous a movement is. So kind of like, is an animal spending its entire day running around the same kind of area, or is it making big movements in that span of time? So just kind of seeing how much movement are these goats making. To kind of calculate this, I used a linear mixed effects model to test change of movement and habitat selection after helicopter activity, and compared the 3 temporal scales. So basically I put everything you see here on this slide into an equation where I was able to set everything before a helicopter event as the baseline, and then was able to quantify the change after the helicopter event in this equation, using everything involved, which is crazy and a lot. So next, I will show you a series of regression plots, which is the output of these linear mixed effects models. And so I'm going to explain what they look like first. So here on the y-axis, it says sequence after. So that means this is the results of the change from the before period. And what fixed means is non-random. So we are comparing 2 predetermined parameters, which was the before and after. And then with regression plots, how you read them is if you look on the x-axis, the 0 above the word estimates is kind of where you want to focus. And so any deviation from the left to the left or the right of the 0 on the x-axis indicates a change in behavior. So that's what we're looking for. And then next, just to highlight, I'll be comparing the 3 models which represent the 3 temporal scales: immediate, meso, and course. So this is what they look like with a little bit of data on it. We're looking for a positive change when the variables move to the left of the, or sorry, I always get these mixed up. Yeah, so we're looking at a positive change when they move over to the right of the 0 there. So looking at the change in home range use after helicopter activity, there was a shift to the right of the 0 for all models, which indicates a positive shift in selection within home ranges. So moving towards the center of the home range. So what this means is that the goats are not being displaced from home ranges in between either years as a result of helicopter activity, but rather they're always staying within their established home range, which is a good thing. So moving on to goat selection of habitat after helicopter activity, I'm going to draw your attention to the top plot in the orange box first, which represents habitat selection in the fall. And we can see that in the immediate scale, so the blue dot there on the left of the 0, there is a shift to the left, which indicates that goats select for lower quality habitat immediately after helicopter activity. And the remainder of the models fall on the right side of the 0, which indicates goats start to select for more preferred habitat after helicopter activity. So there is an immediate change in the 6 hours after a goat experiences a helicopter event. And then they gradually, over the course of 3 days, start to select for the regular, more high quality habitat. So that's in the fall. And in the winter on the bottom plot there, we see that there is really no big shift in goat habitat selection in the wintertime, and all of the variables stay on the right of the 0, which indicates that goats select for preferred habitat after helicopter activity, regardless of the length of time that has passed. So moving on to asking if helicopters change the ways goats move. So this was using the movement metrics I had described before: total distance, mean square displacement, and straightness. I used 3 fixed effects, which you can see on the y-axis here. So again, I'm interested in goat movement after helicopter activity. So this represents a change from movement before helicopter activity. I used helicopter duration, so how long helicopters were flying for that day, assuming that the time that a helicopter is flying for and how close a helicopter got did influence how a goat responded. Yeah, so minimum distance, so the lowest 3D distance between goat and a helicopter on that day. And then finally, I did incorporate an interaction between the two to test if there was a higher effect if helicopters both flew for a long time and there were more close encounters with a goat on that day. So this was the results for mean square displacement, and all of the other movement metrics are kind of similar in their results. So I'm going to use this just as the example. So If you look here, we can see that mean square displacement scores decreased with time. So there is a slight shift, even though they're all on the right of the estimate 0 there, indicating that goats made smaller movements immediately after helicopter activity and gradually returned to making larger movements. And what this shows is that goat movement is more tortuous, so meaning they're making smaller movements in one area soon after helicopter activity, which indicates that goats stay in the same areas and refrain from moving around in the hours after helicopters have been flying. So you can kind of like picture it as goats are kind of hiding and staying in one area when a helicopter flies by, and then gradually getting up and making more movements after that time has passed. The effect of helicopter duration and minimum distance on mean square displacement were similar and showed that the longer a helicopter flies and the closer it gets to a goat, the more long-term the effect. So you can kind of see that in the immediate model is on the left of the estimate there in both of these models. So there is a negative effect of these two variables on goat movement after helicopter activity. And finally, there was no really huge result in the interaction between duration. We didn't really see an effect there, so we didn't really get anything from that question, but that's okay. So in my study, I found that goats initially responded to helicopters and then gradually returned to normal. And this is consistent to previous studies looking at mountain goat reactions to helicopters. The initial change in habitat quality like I said, in the fall, there was a change in habitat selection quality immediately after a helicopter event. And this indicates that goats potentially are abandoning foraging or resting areas to move closer to safer areas, which is why they exhibit more tortuous movements. And this also potentially explains the absence of change in home range use, as you would assume that goats would likely stay in areas that are more familiar and that are perceived as safer than moving to somewhere they perhaps aren't as comfortable in. So with these results, I did come up with a couple of little management recommendations. And the first was to create a kind of a goat smart program, kind of based off what a bear smart program is. And I think that this is the most like easy and you're able to do it now sort of idea that BC Parks could implement. And all this would kind of do would just be to inform people of the importance of limiting attractants and keeping distance from goats when you're camping or hiking in goat habitat. So the goal of this program would allow people to recognize the impact that they have on mountain goats when they're in goat country, and give them the tools they need to urinate outside, not create a salt source, as silly as that sounds. So this would include details such as where to urinate, or if you can go in an outhouse, or it's better to urinate in rocky areas because it doesn't create such a hot spot for the salt, or pouring water over it after you pee to dilute it. And this is really just about getting more people involved and feeling more connected to wildlife. And especially after attending like sheep show and Kamloops, I was just like so inspired by the amount of people I met there who just love these animals. And I think that if you educate more people on it, like people are going to want to change their behaviors to save them. And so I think that that's like probably the easiest and most cost-effective way to get people to start caring about mountain goats when they're out hiking and everything. The next recommendation I made was diversionary salting. And kind of tentatively put this down. I wasn't even sure if I was going to discuss it today because it is so many what ifs to do with this. You'd have to be so careful about where you put them, about what other animals are in the area, because there's just so many things that could potentially go wrong with diversionary salting. However, I think that if it did get to a point where the goats were starting to become aggressive with people, and BC Parks decided that they didn't want goats in the campground area at all, I do think it would be perhaps the most it would cause the biggest result, I think, with this. However, it also would not resolve the issue of anthropogenic salt in the campground or the trail areas, and it would keep goats out of the area altogether. So this one's definitely a very touchy subject. And then finally, with the helicopter things, all the permits and policy that goes around this, I think that right now, especially with the data that we got in this program or in this study, it would just be really handy and a good idea to update the winter range of goats, and to perhaps start the discussion of altering the helicopter use permit in Cathedral Provincial Park. So as a conclusion, I did originally have a very difficult time writing these management recommendations and concluding my thesis, because it felt like I did a lot of wildlife research just to tell you where to pee and where not to pee. But realistically, this research is very valuable in the mountain goat management world. And as I'm going with this, sorry. So I was able to determine somewhat that recreation and helicopter activity do change the ways mountain goats interact with their environment in Cathedral Provincial Park. And realistically, this isn't an isolated event, and these observations of mountain goats and humans interacting in these ways has been observed in many protected areas throughout the range. And so I think that just continually learning and improving management of mountain goats in protected areas is going to really make the most out of these areas and really achieve that idea of dual management and creating coexistence between humans and wildlife. So that concludes my section on my research. I'm just going to quickly talk about the ways that we use the funding from the Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance. And the main way was we got to take a helicopter trip out to Cathedral Provincial Park to pick up a dead goat. So we got a mortality signal for a goat in March of 2021, and it was snowy up there. So we decided to use the funding to hire a helicopter and get our butts out there and do a mortality investigation. So this was a billy that died, and we determined his cause of death to be starvation. He was teeny when we found him. He had been exhibiting some really strange movements that we could see on the GPS data, just hanging out really low in the forest, really sporadic kind of. He probably was just like stumbling around in a state of delusion from being so skinny. When we found him, we just like pulled him right out of this tree well, did a little necropsy, and it's kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see his hip bone right there. And he truly had like no fat on him. Like his rumen was probably the size of a mango, just like the skinniest animal I've ever seen. So unfortunately, he had a rough go of things at the end of that winter, but he contributed a lot of research to us. So we're thankful for him for that. The first goat that died was in August of 2019. So actually just a couple months after we collared these animals. And we just had to hike out to this one. It was summertime, so it was nice. We didn't have to hire a helicopter. But we found her kind of just tucked into this tree. Like we truly found her like this, which seems really strange for her to walk down a ravine and just lay down and die. So we collected a bunch of samples, sent them off to Helen Schwanja, the provincial wildlife veterinarian at the time. And no disease, nothing really wrong, but suspected traumatic event. She did have some blood coming out of her nose and mouth when we found her, and her insides were kind of, I don't know, a little bloody. So suspected traumatic event, she might have fallen or something like that. And then our last goat to die, and most recent, we haven't had any die since this one, was just last summer in July. So she made us hike way out together. We think suspected predation event. We found her way down the backside of the hill in this really wooded area, and luckily we found the collar, but we didn't find much else. Her head was gone, and this was pretty much all that was left. So we think maybe cougar, but it was a couple days after, so we can't tell for sure. But that concludes my section. Thank you very much for listening. And I'd be happy to have a discussion with anyone who has any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. That is some fascinating and looks like very difficult work you had to do.
It was fun. It was an experience.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, you are welcome to unmute yourself. There is one question for you, Laura. What age was the Billy?
What age was the Billy? He was 6 or 7. I'd have to, yeah, but 6 or 7, definitely in there.
Yeah, I suppose that's an unfortunate reality of being a mountain goat.
Yes, yeah. It was really interesting though, especially working in a lab where all the other people I was working with were like studying deer or mountain sheep or bighorn sheep and stuff like that. And most of their, almost like 100% of their animals died of predation. So it was really interesting seeing a couple animals die of what you could say are like natural causes. And to find that Billy like in such pristine shape out there in the forest, it was pretty special. You kind of really feel just how like safe they are in their way of getting away from animals, and yeah, just how remote and rugged the places they live are.
Yeah. We did have another question in the comments related to that, actually. I thought mortalities could be from avalanches. Does that ever become a factor?
I can't say I've ever like walked upon goats that have been killed by avalanches, but it's definitely a thing that occurs. It didn't occur in our region, but yeah, definitely a problem for mountain goats, specifically avalanches. Yeah.
Okay. I see a hand up from Daniel. You're welcome to unmute.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, Daniel Norton, outfitter up in North Central BC here. I've actually got 3 questions, pretty quick ones, if you've got time for that. First one being, what are your thoughts? It's my understanding that we're not great at studying counting goats in general in BC. You know, they're a tough animal to kind of get full compositions on. So what are your thoughts as far as citability with aerial studies? You know, you're flying around doing full compositions, up tight valleys, having the helicopter in there, close proximity, you know, is it plausible that it's pushing goats maybe, you know, down into pockets, into timber, kind of out of the way, further across the valley, goats that might not be counted in the studies? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a big possibility. I did have the opportunity to go out and do a count on the cathedral herd, actually. So it was cool kind of knowing where the goats were the day prior, looking at the GPS collars and going out there and trying to find them. And it was really difficult. And they did all get up and run and hide. And when we flew by, and they are white and they live on a white background. So yeah, I can, from that one experience, you know, like I was dizzy by the end of it.
Yeah.
So
I for sure, you know, on a personal level, just years of being around them, you know, from a hunting standpoint, if you're up in the Alpine and there's aircraft goes by, especially helicopter low level, you know, my experience for sure is right away they'll run into thick juniper somewhere, you know, slide under a cave or something like that. So I was just curious if you had comments on that. Next one, do you know much about or have thoughts on snowmobiles? You know, it's both mechanized. Do you have any thoughts on that as far as like on the ground mechanized disruption?
Yeah, I mean, I know there hasn't been a lot of research on goats specifically, but like on caribou, snowmobiles are shown to be a big deal. I think that you have to remember that these animals, like, they have no idea what it is. And like even like with humans, just like hiking, like it changes these animals and the way they interact with their environment. And so I think that while it's easy to say that any loud machine that's out there is probably going to cause some sort of like what the heck moment for them.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's probably, you know, we deal with that in my area more so than heli. Of course, we've got, the heli skiing operations, but snowmobiles definitely, again, on a personal level, I've seen goats change their kind of range in over 30 years as snowmobiles have kind of gotten there deeper and deeper. And last one, just your thoughts on, of course, like you say, your study in Cathedral had limited hours of, flight training in there, but what about in an area where, and either snowmobiles or helicopter, but say it's heli skiing or a popular sledding area where it might be, all winter long, December till April, steady traffic with a medium, helicopter, or like I say, with sleds. Do you think those goats might eventually just stay right out of that range, or do you have any insight to that?
Yeah. Oh, I forget her name right now, but Becky, she did her thesis on mountain goats back in 2013, and that's what she looked at was a heli company. And she found the same thing, kind of like a lot of movement. There is a paper that I referenced a lot. I can't remember by who right now. I'm not great with papers and names. But looking at mountain goats in a ski area in, I think it was the Marmot Basin, and they found that they would come in, after hours and use those areas, but as soon as the ski area was up and running, they get out of there. So I think if you did pay attention to all those things, you would see changes in behavior, especially when it is that often.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for the questions.
Kevin, I see that your hand is up, but I just wanted to add a comment or a suggestion. If anybody here that is on the Science and Conservation Committee, if you also have any things to add to Daniel's previous questions, you are more than welcome to pipe up. Otherwise, Laura, there are a couple more questions in the chat. So if nobody else has any other comments, I'll dive into the chat questions. Or Kevin, if you'd like to speak, you can go ahead. You got your hand up and then we'll hop to the chat.
Yeah, sorry, I'm toggling back and forth here. Just want to make everybody aware that the Northern Wild Sheep and Goat Council put together two different position statements, one in 2004 on helicopter disturbance, basically from a recreation standpoint. And that document stood for almost 18 years, but in 2022, Kevin White, formerly of Alaska Department of Fish and Game, led about 15 people to put together a revised, updated version of that document. It's on our website. Carla, I think it's on the RMGA website. So if folks want to look at that, it's a great, heavy citations. It's a great resource. A lot of really good information there. So Carla, I'm just double checking. I think it's on the RMGA website, correct? I know it's on the Northern Wild Sheep and Goat Council website.
We have it in our resource list. So if you give me half a second, while everyone's talking, I was looking, do you know what year it's on in the proceedings for your guys' stuff?
It hasn't been published in the proceedings yet. That'll be the lead manuscript for the 2022 from Jackson Hole, but it is on the resolution subpage. And so what might be good is if you or Stacy want to send that out, it's a relatively manageable size PDF. Just send it out to the people that are interested and they can circulate it. But Kevin White took the lead on that effort. And so that was finalized and adopted before Christmas.
Excellent. All righty. I'll go back to some of the questions that were in the chat for you, Laura.
Okay.
So you mentioned diversionary salt. I find that a very hard word to say. We have a question. What are the drawbacks to setting up an artificial salt lick?
Salt licks I find are very contentious, especially in the literature, and especially after just finishing some research on chronic wasting disease. And kind of just getting down to what you're creating on the landscape is an artificial aggregation of animals, of wild animals, that you don't really know like what they're carrying. You can't control what is visiting those salt licks. So like especially with Moby in the region, like goats can carry Moby. You don't want to be spreading it there because salt licks can be hotspots for disease. And also, I mean, again, you're just creating this like anthropogenic sort of mineral lick on the landscape. And again, changing the ways that these goats are using their landscape. So diversionary salting being the thing is like, yeah, you're moving them out of this area, but what is different in this area, and are there going to be predators in this area? You know, it's just kind of one of those things where you're kind of, as humans, we're changing the ways that these animals move. I think it's just important to be cautious when you're doing something like that on the landscape, and especially in a protected area. There was actually a BC Parks ranger that they put a salt lick close by one of the trails years and years ago. They removed it 5 years prior to the study starting in 2019, and the goats are still using that area because the salt, you know, leaches into the soil and everything like that, and it stays in the ground for a long time. So the goats still use that area a lot. So I think it's just better to operate with a hand of caution when you're changing the ways that animals move around and use their world. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I feel like human decisions tend to have lots of ripple effects that we can't see.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the last question that I see in the comments is from our very own Braydon. Do you have any plans for data on kid mortality due to helicopter influence?
Kid mortality. I'm not sure to say. We the only way we can really measured like kid survival was just going back and counting them year to year, and we did see, you know, nannies with a yearling and a kid on heel. So that was really promising to see. I know that like kids stay really close to their maternal group in that first year. I'm not sure if there was any mortality directly due to helicopter influence or use. That would take a lot more research than just the GPS points we had. But I think it's kind of like low on the scale of problems there. Yeah, I think.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All righty. I'm seeing no more hands up. I'm seeing no more comments or questions, or no more questions, sorry. There are a couple of comments in the chat. We have the links to the position statements that Kevin Hurley mentioned. And then Bill also put his contact information if anybody wanted to approach him for more specific questions as well about mountain goats and people and/or recreation. Oh, wait, there's one more. I just saw it. Does the size or social structure of a goat group impact the response to helicopter traffic?
That's a really good question. I'm not too sure. I can see there being in a you know, in a bigger size than just one, but I think that even if they were in a big size, there would still be some kind of reaction to a helicopter flying over.
Yeah.
But an interesting question for sure.
It's always a really good question when you stump the speaker. All right. So if there are no more comments or questions or anything like that, I think we can safely wrap up the presentation. This is our first one that went completely on schedule. So great job, team. Yes, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Laura and Braydon, for speaking. Thank you, Sawyer, for your few words at the beginning and all the support that Vortex has given us. Our next presentation is April 19th, I believe. I'm just double checking my calendar. Yes, April 19th is our next webinar. So keep your eye out on social media and our website for the registration and updates. And yeah, is there anything else that I'm missing, Carla, before we wrap up the evening?
Just that the recording will be available afterwards. We'll send out the link for you guys so you can watch it. We'll put it on YouTube. So if you want to watch it or share it with your colleagues, then you may do so.
Awesome. All right. thank you everyone for attending, and
Thank you.
that is it. Have a good night.
Thanks, guys.